She was starving by the river, until the cowboy wrapped his coat around her. She was dying when he found her. Not the quick kind of dying, the kind that comes with a bullet or a rope or a fall from a horse. This was the slow kind. The kind that steals you piece by piece until there's nothing left but breath and bone, and the faint hope that someone might notice before you disappear entirely. The cowboy saw her from the ridge above the river. At first, he thought she was a bundle of rags caught in the reeds. Something discarded. Something forgotten. But then the bundle moved, just barely, and he knew it was a woman. He didn't think. He just rode down. The horse's hooves kicked up mud as he dismounted near the water's edge. The air smelled like wet stone and rotting leaves. The sky overhead was gray and heavy, the kind of sky that made the whole world feel like it was holding its breath. He could hear the river moving, slow and cold and indifferent, and beneath that sound, something softer. A whimper, a shiver. She was lying on her side in the mud, her body curled in on itself like she was trying to protect something that had already been taken. Her dress was torn and filthy, clinging to her like a second skin. Her hair dark and tangled, spread around her head like a halo made of dirt and desperation. Her face was pale, almost gray, and her lips were cracked and bloodless. She didn't look up when he approached. She didn't have the strength. The cowboy knelt beside her, his boots sinking into the soft earth. He didn't say anything. Words felt wrong in a moment like this. Instead, he reached for the coat on his shoulders, the heavy wool coat that had seen him through a dozen winters, 100 cold nights, more loneliness than he cared to count. And he pulled it free. He laid it over her carefully, like he was covering something sacred. The warmth must have reached her, because her eyes opened. Slowly, painfully. They were blue, pale blue, like sky reflected in shallow water, and they stared at him without recognition, without fear, just emptiness. "You're safe," he said quietly. His voice was rough from disuse. He wasn't a man who spoke much. "I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't respond. She just blinked, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Her hands, thin and trembling, gripped the edges of the coat and pulled it tighter around herself. He glanced around. There was no one else. No wagon. No campfire. No sign of how she'd ended up here, alone and starving by the river. The nearest town was a day's ride south. The nearest ranch even farther. This stretch of land was empty. Forgotten. A place where people came to disappear. "Can you sit up?" he asked. She tried. Her body shifted, and she made a sound, small and broken, like something inside her was tearing. He reached out and steadied her, one hand on her shoulder, the other on her back. She weighed almost nothing, like holding a bird. When she was upright, her head swayed, and he thought she might pass out. But she didn't. She just sat there, wrapped in his coat, staring at the ground between her knees. He pulled his canteen from his saddle and uncorked it. "Drink," he said, holding it out to her. Her hands shook as she took it. She drank too fast, water spilling down her chin, and he gently pulled the canteen back. "Slow," he said. "You'll make yourself sick." She nodded, her breathing ragged. She took another sip, smaller this time, and then another. When she finally lowered the canteen, she looked at him again. Really looked at him. And for the first time, there was something behind her eyes. Something alive. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a breath. He nodded. "What's your name?" She hesitated. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. She swallowed hard, wincing like it hurt. Then she spoke. "Clara," she said. "Clara Brennan." The name hit him like a punch to the chest. Brennan. He felt the air leave his lungs, felt the world tilt sideways, felt the weight of 1,000 mistakes come crashing down on him all at once. Brennan. He knew that name. God help him, he knew that name. His face didn't change. He was good at that, at hiding what he felt. A drifter learned early that emotions were dangerous. They made you slow. They made you weak. So he kept his expression still, his voice steady, even as his heart hammered against his ribs. "Clara," he repeated softly. "You got people nearby? Someone looking for you?" She shook her head. Slowly. Painfully. No, she said. There's no one. Where'd you come from? Her eyes dropped. Her fingers twisted in the fabric of his coat. A ranch, she said. West of here. Maybe. I don't know. I walked for a long time. I got lost. Why'd you leave? She didn't answer right away. Her jaw tightened. Her breathing quickened. Then, quietly, almost like a confession, because there was nothing left. He wanted to ask more. Wanted to know what had happened. Wanted to know if the man she belonged to, if the name she carried, was the same man he remembered. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not while she looked like she might break if he said the wrong thing. Instead, he stood and offered her his hand. Come on, he said. Let's get you somewhere warm. She stared at his hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached up and took it. He pulled her to her feet, steadying her when her legs buckled beneath her. She was so small, so fragile. He could feel every bone in her hand. What's your name? She asked, her voice barely audible. He hesitated, just for a heartbeat. Then he lied. James, he said. It wasn't his name, but it was close enough to the truth that it didn't feel like a complete betrayal. She nodded, leaning against him for support. Thank you, James. He didn't respond. He just helped her onto his horse, climbed up behind her, and turned the animal south toward the only shelter he knew, a small, abandoned line shack tucked into the hills. It wasn't much, but it was dry, and it was warm. And right now, that was all that mattered. As they rode, she leaned back against his chest, exhausted, her body going limp. The coat was still wrapped around her shoulders. His coat. And beneath it, she whispered something, so soft he almost missed it. A name. Not hers. Not his. Another name. Thomas, she breathed. My Thomas. The cowboy's hands tightened on the reins. Thomas Brennan. The man who'd ridden beside him. The man who'd laughed beside him. The man who died because of him. And this woman, this broken, starving woman wrapped in his coat, was Thomas Brennan's widow. He didn't say anything. He just kept riding, the weight of her grief pressing against his chest, heavier than any bullet he'd ever carried. He was building her a fire when she said the name again. Thomas. Just that. Nothing more. But it was enough to make his hands go still over the kindling. The line shack was small and dark, with walls that barely kept the wind out and a roof that leaked when it rained. But it was shelter. And shelter, out here in the wild territories, was sometimes the difference between living and dying. He'd brought her here because it was the only place he knew. The only place that didn't ask questions. She sat on the floor near the stone hearth, wrapped in his coat, her knees pulled up to her chest. She looked like a child, small and frightened and lost. Her hair hung in damp tangles around her face, and her eyes, those pale blue eyes, stared into nothing. He struck the match and held it to the dry grass and twigs. The flame caught slowly, hesitant at first, then grew. Orange light filled the small room, casting shadows that danced across the walls like ghosts. Thomas Brennan, she said softly. That was his name. The cowboy didn't turn around. He just kept feeding the fire, adding larger sticks, watching the flames climb higher. His jaw was tight. His chest felt like it was being crushed. Your husband, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. He finally looked at her. Her face was turned toward the fire now, lit by the glow. There were tears on her cheeks, but she wasn't crying. Not actively. They just sat there, quiet and still, like they'd been falling for so long she didn't notice them anymore. How long's he been gone? The drifter asked. 2 years, she whispered. 2 years this spring. 2 years. He'd been running for 2 years. The math was simple. The guilt was not. He turned back to the fire and added another piece of wood. The flames crackled and hissed. Outside, the wind howled through the hills, carrying with it the scent of rain and dust and distance. What happened to him? He asked, even though he already knew. Even though the memory of it played behind his eyes every night when he tried to sleep. She was quiet for a long time. So long he thought maybe she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice barely more than a breath. He was shot, she said, during a robbery. He and another man, his friend, they were moving cattle for a rancher up north. Outlaws ambushed them. Thomas, he didn't come home. The drifter's hand stilled. His throat tightened. They told me he died protecting someone, she continued. That he stood his ground so the other man could get away. They said he was brave. Brave. The word cut deeper than any knife. He wanted to tell her the truth. Wanted to say that Thomas Brennan hadn't just been brave. He'd been the best man the drifter had ever known. That he'd been good and honest and strong in all the ways the drifter wasn't. That he'd laughed easy and loved hard and never once turned his back on someone who needed help. He wanted to tell her that Thomas had saved his life that day. That when the outlaws came, when the bullets started flying and the horses screamed and the world turned into blood and chaos, Thomas had stepped in front of him, had taken the shot meant for him, had fallen into the dirt with his hand pressed to his chest, his eyes wide with shock, his mouth forming words that never came. He wanted to tell her that he'd run, that he'd left Thomas bleeding in the dust while he rode away like a coward, that he'd told himself it was too late, that Thomas was already gone, that staying would have meant dying too. But the truth was simpler and uglier than that. He'd run because he was afraid. And Thomas Brennan, good, brave Thomas Brennan, had died alone because of it. But he didn't say any of that. He just nodded and said, "Sounds like he was a good man." He was, Clara said. Her voice broke on the words. He was the best man I ever knew. The drifter stood and moved to his saddlebag near the door. He pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth, dried meat, hard bread, a tin of beans, and brought it to her. He set it down beside her gently, like he was offering something sacred. "Eat," he said. She stared at the food for a moment, then reached for it with shaking hands. She tore off a piece of bread and brought it to her mouth. She chewed slowly, mechanically, like she'd forgotten how. Like her body remembered hunger, but her mind was somewhere else. He sat down across from her, leaning back against the wall. The fire burned between them, warm and steady. He watched her eat, watched the way her fingers trembled, the way her shoulders hunched forward like she was trying to make herself smaller. She looked like she'd been carrying the weight of the world for too long. "How'd you end up out here?" he asked quietly. She swallowed hard, then looked down at her hands. "The ranch," she said. "After Thomas died, I tried to keep it going. But I couldn't. Not alone. The debts piled up. The cattle got sick. The land. It just took and took until there was nothing left." She paused, her breath hitching. "I lost it all. The house. The land. Everything Thomas and I built together. Gone. And then I just walked," she said. "I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay there anymore. Couldn't stay in that empty house where everything reminded me of him." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I thought maybe if I walked far enough, I'd stop feeling it. The pain. The loneliness. But it followed me. It always follows." The drifter said nothing. He understood that kind of walking, that kind of running. He'd been doing it for 2 years. "Do you have family?" he asked. "Somewhere you can go?" She shook her head. "No. My parents are gone. Thomas's family, they blamed me. Said I should have done more. Should have been stronger." She laughed, a small bitter sound. "Maybe they were right." "They weren't," the drifter said firmly. She looked up at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. "You did what you could," he continued. "Sometimes that's all anyone can do. And sometimes it still isn't enough. That doesn't make it your fault." Her eyes filled with tears again. "You don't know me," she whispered. "You don't know what I did. What I didn't do." "No," he said. "But I know what grief looks like. And I know you're still here. Still breathing. That takes strength most people don't have." She stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly and turned back to the fire. They sat in silence after that. The widow and the drifter. 2 broken people sharing a small room and a dying fire. Outside, the wind continued to howl. Inside, the warmth spread slowly, pushing back the cold. He wanted to leave, wanted to saddle his horse and ride away before she asked too many questions. Before the truth came crawling out of him like a wounded animal. Drifters didn't stay. They moved. They ran. They kept ahead of the past. But he didn't move. He just sat there, watching her eat, watching the firelight play across her face, feeling the weight of Thomas Brennan's name settle over him like a stone. She didn't know who he was. Not yet. And maybe he thought she never would. Maybe silence could be a kindness. Maybe some truths were better left buried. But as he watched her pull his coat tighter around her shoulders, as he saw the way she held herself together with nothing but will and grief, he knew the truth would come eventually. It always did. And when it did, he wasn't sure either of them would survive it. The locket fell from her hand and hit the floor with a sound like a heartbeat stopping. The cowboy looked up from the fire he was tending. Clara stood frozen near the window, her hand pressed to her chest where the chain had been, her face drained of color. The small golden locket lay open on the wooden floor between them, its two tiny photographs staring up at the ceiling like prayers left unanswered. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to drop it." He rose slowly and crossed the room. He bent down and picked up the locket carefully, like it was made of glass. The chain was thin and delicate, worn from years of being touched. He looked at the photographs inside before he could stop himself. On one side, Thomas Brennan, younger, smiling, alive. On the other, a baby, small and pale, wrapped in white cloth, eyes closed like sleep. The drifter's chest tightened. He closed the locket gently and held it out to her. "It's not broken," he said softly. Clara took it from him with trembling hands. She held it against her heart and closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek. "Thank you," she breathed. He nodded and turned away, giving her the privacy grief demanded. That was how it had been for 5 days now. Small moments, quiet gestures, the slow, careful rebuilding of a life that had been shattered. She was healing. He could see it. The color had returned to her face. Her hands no longer shook when she held a cup of water. She could walk without leaning on him, could sit without collapsing. The hunger in her eyes had faded, replaced by something softer, but no less painful memory. He'd stayed longer than he meant to. Drifters didn't put down roots. They didn't linger in one place, didn't let themselves be needed. But every time he thought about saddling his horse and riding away, he'd see her standing in the doorway of the line shack, watching the sunrise with that faraway look in her eyes, and he'd find another reason to stay. The fence needed fixing. The roof leaked. The river was full of fish she didn't know how to catch. Excuses, all of them. The truth was simpler. He couldn't leave her. Not yet. Not when she still looked like the wind might blow her away. So he stayed. He fixed the fence posts that had rotted through, driving new wood into the hard earth with steady, rhythmic strikes. He patched the holes in the roof with tar and scrap metal he found rusting behind the shack. He woke before dawn and walked down to the river with a line and hook, catching trout and bass that he cleaned and cooked over the fire while she watched in silence. He didn't talk much. Neither did she. But the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of things neither of them knew how to say. On the third day, she asked him about his horse. "What's his name?" she said, standing near the small corral he'd built from fallen branches and rope. The drifter looked up from the saddle he was mending. "Doesn't have one," he said. "Why not?" He shrugged. "Never needed one, I guess. He knows when I'm talking to him." Clara reached out and stroked the horse's neck. The animal, a big bay gelding with a white star on his forehead, leaned into her touch. "He's gentle," she said. "He's old," the cowboy replied. "Seen too much to spook easy." She smiled faintly. It was the first time he'd seen her smile. It didn't last long, but it was there. Real. On the fourth day, she asked him to teach her how to fish. They walked down to the river together in the early morning, when the mist still clung to the water, and the world felt new. He showed her how to bait the hook, how to cast the line, how to wait with patience that bordered on prayer. She was clumsy at first, tangling the line, losing the bait. But she didn't give up. She kept trying, her jaw set with determination he recognized. The determination of someone who'd lost too much to quit now. When she finally caught a fish, a small trout that fought hard against the line, she laughed. A real laugh. Bright and sudden, like light breaking through clouds. The sound startled him, made his chest ache. "I did it," she said, holding up the fish like a trophy. "You did," he agreed. She looked at him, then really looked at him, and something passed between them. Gratitude, maybe. Or connection. Something fragile and important that neither of them named. On the 5th night, after they'd eaten and the fire had burned low, she pulled out the locket again. She did this every night. The drifter had learned to recognize the ritual. She would sit near the hearth, the flames casting shadows across her face, and she would open the locket and stare at the photographs inside. Sometimes she would cry. Sometimes she wouldn't. But she always stared for a long time, like she was memorizing faces she was afraid of forgetting. Tonight, she spoke. "This is Thomas," she said quietly, holding the locket toward the firelight. "My husband." The cowboy didn't move, didn't breathe. "And this," she continued, her voice cracking, "is our daughter, Grace. She died when she was 6 months old. Fever took her in the winter." Clara's fingers traced the edge of the photograph. "Thomas never recovered from losing her. Neither did I. But he tried. He kept working, kept building, kept believing we could be happy again." She closed the locket and pressed it to her lips. "I don't know if we ever were. Happy, I mean, after that." The drifter's throat felt like it was closing. "I'm sorry," he said. "Everyone's sorry," Clara whispered. "But sorry doesn't bring them back." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." She looked at him across the fire. Her eyes were wet but clear. "You never told me your real name," she said. His heart stopped. "You said James," she continued. "But you hesitated. Like you were reaching for something that didn't quite fit." He'd underestimated her. Thought grief had made her blind to the details. But grief didn't make people blind. It made them sharp. Made them notice the small things, the cracks in a voice, the pause before a lie, the weight a man carried in his silence. "James is fine," he said carefully. "Is it your real name?" He looked into the fire. Watched the flames dance and curl and consume the wood. Watched the way they turned everything to ash. "Does it matter?" he asked. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I suppose not. You've been kind to me. That's what matters." But it did matter. He could see it in her eyes. She wanted to know who he was. Wanted to understand why a stranger would stop for her, save her, stay with her. Wanted to believe there was goodness in the world that didn't come with conditions. And he wanted to tell her, wanted to say his real name, the name Thomas Brennan had called him by, the name that was tied to blood and dust and failure. But if he told her, she'd ask more questions. And those questions would lead to the truth. And the truth would destroy the fragile peace they'd built together in this small, forgotten place. So he lied again. "James," he repeated. "That's my name." She nodded slowly, then turned back to the fire. The river outside moved through the darkness, cold and endless, carrying away everything it touched. It had taken her husband, her child, her home, her hope, and now it carried his lie too, floating downstream where neither of them could reach it. The photograph was in her hands when he came back from the river. She stood in the doorway of the line shack, backlit by the morning sun, holding the small, crumpled picture like it was burning her fingers. Her face was pale. Her eyes were wide. And when she looked at him, really looked at him, he knew that everything was about to break. "Who are you?" she whispered. The drifter stopped walking. The fish he'd caught hung from a line in his hand, forgotten. His heart hammered against his ribs, so hard he thought it might crack them. "Clara, who are you?" she said again, louder this time. Her voice shook. Her whole body shook. She held up the photograph. "This is Thomas. My Thomas. And this," her breath hitched. "This is you." He couldn't deny it. The photograph showed two young men standing side by side, arms slung over each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera like they owned the world. One of them was Thomas Brennan, tall and strong, with eyes that crinkled when he smiled. The other was him, younger, cleaner. Before the guilt had carved lines into his face. The cowboy dropped the fish and took a step forward. Clara, step back. Don't, she said. Her voice was sharp now. Hard. Don't come near me. He stopped. Held up his hands. I can explain. Explain. She laughed, a bitter broken sound. You've been lying to me. You've been here in my home, eating my food, sleeping under my roof, and you've been lying to me this entire time. I know, you knew Thomas. Her voice cracked on his name. You knew my husband. And you didn't tell me. I couldn't. Why? She demanded. Tears spilled down her cheeks now, hot and angry. Why couldn't you tell me? Why did you lie about your name? Why did you stay? He didn't have an answer. Not one that would make sense. Not one that would make it hurt less. She looked down at the photograph again. Her hands were shaking so badly the picture blurred. I found this in your saddlebag, she said quietly. I was looking for a needle and thread to fix your shirt. I thought I could do something kind for you. Because you've been kind to me. She laughed again, that same bitter sound. But this, she held up the photograph. This isn't kindness. This is cruelty. Clara, please, what's your real name? She asked. He swallowed hard. His throat felt like it was full of glass. Ben, he said. Ben Garrett. Ben Garrett, she repeated, testing the name like it was poison. Thomas talked about you. He talked about you all the time. Said you were like a brother to him. Said he trusted you more than anyone. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He died with you, didn't he? The world tilted. The ground beneath Ben's feet felt unsteady, like it might open up and swallow him whole. Yes, he said. Clara's knees buckled. She caught herself against the doorframe, her breathing ragged. Tell me, she said. Tell me what happened. I want to hear it from you. Ben's hands curled into fists at his sides. He'd spent 2 years running from this moment. 2 years trying to bury the truth under miles of dust and distance. But there was nowhere left to run. The truth had caught him, and it was standing in front of him, wearing the face of the woman whose life he'd destroyed. We were moving cattle for a rancher up north, he began. His voice was flat, dead. It was supposed to be simple work, easy money, but outlaws hit us halfway through the drive. 6 of them, maybe more. They came out of nowhere, shooting, screaming, trying to scatter the herd. Clara didn't move, didn't speak. She just stared at him with those pale blue eyes that saw everything. Thomas and I tried to fight them off, Ben continued. But we were outnumbered, outgunned. The cattle stampeded. Everything turned into chaos. I got separated from Thomas. My horse went down. I was on foot, running, trying to find cover. He paused, closed his eyes, saw it all again, the dust, the blood, the bullets tearing through the air like angry wasps. Thomas found me, he said. He rode back for me. Could have kept going, could have saved himself. But he came back. Ben's voice cracked. He pulled me onto his horse. We were riding hard, trying to get away, when one of the outlaws got a clear shot. Thomas, he stopped, opened his eyes, looked at Clara. Thomas put himself between me and the bullet. Clara made a sound, small and broken, like something inside her had just snapped. He fell, Ben said. Hit the ground hard. I tried to go back for him, but the outlaws were still shooting. The horse was panicking. And Thomas, his breath hitched. Thomas looked at me and said, "Go." Just that. One word. Go. And you did, Clara whispered. Yes, Ben said. I rode away. Left him bleeding in the dirt. Told myself there was nothing I could do. That he was already gone. That staying would have meant dying too. He laughed, a hollow, terrible sound. But the truth is simpler than that. I was afraid. And because I was afraid, Thomas Brennan died alone. Silence. The wind moved through the trees. The river whispered in the distance. And between them, the weight of the truth sat like a stone. Clara lowered the photograph. Her hands had stopped shaking. Her face was empty now. Hollowed out. You've been running, she said. Yes. For 2 years. Yes. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, Why did you stop? Why did you help me? Ben's jaw tightened. Because when I saw you lying by that river, Starving and broken and alone, I saw him. I saw Thomas. And I thought, his voice broke. I thought maybe if I could save you, it would mean something. Maybe it would balance the scales. Maybe I could stop being the man who ran. But it doesn't work that way, Clara said softly. No, Ben agreed. It doesn't. She walked toward him slowly, each step deliberate. When she was close enough to touch him, she stopped. She looked up into his face, this man who'd lied to her, saved her, haunted her, and her expression was unreadable. You can't undo the past, she said. Her voice was quiet, steady, like snow falling on a grave. You can't bring Thomas back. You can't erase what you did, or what you didn't do. I know, Ben whispered. But you can stop running from it, Clara continued. You can stop punishing yourself. You can choose to be better than the man you were that day. Ben's eyes burned. His chest felt like it was caving in. How, he asked. How do I do that? Clara reached up and took the locket from around her neck. She held it for a moment, then pressed it into his hand. You live, she said. You keep living. You keep trying. You help people when you can. You don't run anymore. That's how. Ben stared down at the locket, at Thomas's face, at the baby who'd never grown up, at all the love and loss contained in one small piece of gold. I don't deserve forgiveness, he said. No, Clara agreed. You don't. But I'm giving it to you anyway. Not because you've earned it, but because carrying hate is too heavy. And I'm tired of carrying heavy things. She stepped back, wiped her eyes, took a deep breath. You should go now, she said gently. Ben nodded. He moved slowly, gathering his things, his saddlebag, his rifle, the few belongings he'd brought. When he reached for his coat, Clara stopped him. Leave it, she said. He looked at her, confused. The coat, she said. Leave here. I'll need it when winter comes. He understood then. She was keeping a piece of him. A reminder. Not of the lie, but of the truth. Of the moment when he'd stopped running long enough to be kind. Ben took off his gun belt and laid it on the table. I don't need this anymore either, he said. Clara nodded. He walked to the door. Stopped. Turned back. Thank you, he said. For what? For seeing me, he said. Not the man I was. Not the man I thought I had to be. Just me. Clara smiled sadly. Go be better, Ben Garrett. He climbed onto his horse and rode away from the line shack, away from the river, away from the widow who'd given him something he'd thought was impossible, a reason to stop running. Behind him, Clara stood in the doorway, wrapped in his coat, watching him disappear into the distance. The past couldn't be undone, but the future was still unwritten.